Welcome back to Sex and Space. I'm Toshi, and today we were thrilled to be joined by Amal Awad. Amal is a writer, director, and performer, and as a journalist has contributed to publications including The Guardian, the Sydney Morning Herald, ELLE, and Frankie. She's produced and presented for ABC Radio National and is the author of 8 books, both fiction and non-fiction. She joined Jane on the podcast today to talk about the veil, identity, sexuality, faith, and culture. Let's get into it. Welcome, Amal. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you for having me.
Sex and Space.
Thanks.
And one of the things that we were asked by you at the beginning was, the relationship between your world and ours. And I guess Sex in Space is a very broad church. We deal with identity, with culture, with relationships, sexuality, biology of sex, all sorts of stuff. It just gathered under that heading. But of course, Sex in Space sounds like we just talk about having sex.
I mean, it does put out a certain vibe.
It does. It's too late now. We've got the .com and we live it. But yes, it's a really tricky one to navigate because for us it always meant so many things.
I mean, I think it means a lot of things to people in general, doesn't it? Sex seems to be tied into everything in our lives anyway. Like it's in advertisements, it's in TV shows and movies and books, and it's taught in schools, and so it's not really something that you can separate in a way. So it makes sense.
I know it's interesting. If we'd called it sexuality in space, I'm not sure it'd have had the same ring, but that would have been more true.
Yeah. But I think it's a very funky title. I like it.
Thank you. But it was started because of the absence of conversation and education around all of those things. And from our end, I think the other side of it is not only do we not know a lot about ourselves, we don't know a lot about each other when it comes to different ways of being in the world, different people in the world. Mm-hmm. And so when I watched a video of you taking part in talking about wearing the veil or not, my interest was really piqued, and I wanted to invite you here because I think that's become quite an interesting, contentious space again of conversation around identity and sexual identity or gendered identity in today's world. And so maybe we can start by you telling our listeners what the video was and how come you were in it.
There's an Australian TV show called House of Gods. It's fictional, and it is predominantly focused on a Muslim community in Sydney. And, the headscarf is a very, I wouldn't say a prominent character, but it's such a prominent element for the women. The women in the show wear the headscarf, and as part of, I guess, I don't want to say promotion, but in the discussions surrounding this show, because it was really the first of its kind, they did a lot of informational sort of pieces, and one of them was about the veil. And the journalist interviewed me first and said, we want to do a video version of it as well, and so that's how it happened. And essentially, I kind of always have to put in that preface that I have worn it before. So I come from a place of experience. I would never feel comfortable commenting on something that I haven't personally experienced. And I also just feel like it's very important to have more nuanced discussions about the veil in general, because it is contentious, as you said, highly misunderstood, but also just given more weight sometimes than it should be given. I think it's really interesting how women's bodies are policed, including by other women. And I feel like when I wore it, the worst criticisms I got were from other women, who felt like it was their place to tell me that I was oppressed, that, it was a pity, what a shame, all of these things. And so I really kind of resented those comments at the time, because I didn't feel like any of that was true. And I still would say it wasn't true for me at the time. So I think it's a highly charged is probably how I would put it. And you can see it now in the political worlds as well, how the headscarf is kind of like utilized as this flag to say, look at how oppressed these Arab women are, or women in Afghanistan. It's become that just that quick trick that people use to sort of say we're better than them, or they need our help, or they need saving. And I've written extensively about this as well, and I wrote a whole book about Arab women called Beyond Veiled Clichés. And the reason why I say this isn't like some shameless plug. It's that I literally called the book Beyond Veiled Clichés because it is a cliche now. There's no real understanding, but also no appreciation for the fact that I would say many women choose to wear it. And also some women don't. Some women feel pressured into it. They feel like that is destined for them, that they have to wear it eventually. Or if they don't, there is a punishment awaiting them, in hell. So I just think it's such a layered discussion. And so I think when I was included, it was to offer that perspective as someone who had worn it, and also could say, well, yeah, there are so many layers to this discussion. It's just not simple. And also it's not our job to tell people how to feel about it so that they feel better. It's a woman's body, it's her choice. So sorry if that's a very long answer to your question, but that's essentially really these discussions. And I've been asked in the past to do discussions like that, and I've always said no. And I, for some reason, I think maybe it was also because of the journalist who asked me, being Muslim herself, I felt like I really wanted to like sort of illuminate another side that I don't think gets enough airtime. So
I think that's great, and that's why we're here.
Yeah. So yeah.
And there's lots in there. Let's start to unpack some of it. When you were young, as you say, you wore the veil. What did it? Because meaning changes, right? What was its meaning for you as a young girl growing up?
Yeah, so I didn't wear it as a young girl. I wore it in my 20s. I actually did part-time wear it in high school. I tried it out and I was about 15. And I absolutely wanted to embrace that element of my faith. And so what would happen was I would go to school during the week and wouldn't wear it. And then on the weekends and after school, I would wear it. And it was a little bit confusing, I think, for me at the time. Eventually, I decided not to do that anymore and I took it off. And then when I was at university, I think I put it on when I turned 21. And the real thing that motivated that change was, for the first time, I was really amongst Muslims, and Arab women especially, who wore it on their own, like it was basically their own desire to wear it. And so no one had forced them into it, and they looked amazing, and they wore these beautiful scarves, and it was such a strong, I felt like it was a very, very strong, like a strong signal of their identity and who they were. And at that time, I felt very much adrift. Like I felt like I wasn't brought up in an area that was very Muslim heavy or Arab heavy. So I always felt like a bit of an outsider. And then when I went to university, here I was finally amongst people who had very similar lives to me, similar restrictions, parents who were strict about curfews, things like that. And it was just really warming and nurturing to sort of be in the fold of these other women. And so I wore the headscarf, I suppose, in an effort to really embrace that identity, that I was, a young Arab Muslim woman. I had a certain lifestyle that was going to affect how I interacted in the world and how I interacted with other people. And when you wear a headscarf, it is very much a statement, whether you like it or not, you're not anonymous, actually. You stand out. And it definitely sends the signal to people that, hey, I don't live like you necessarily. I have a certain code that I live by, for example. So it was very, very much a community thing for me, feeling like I was part of that group. Really, when you put it on and other women are wearing it, they celebrate it like it's an engagement. It was very exciting, to have that. And I definitely felt like there was an element of me saying, hey, better that you do this now on your own sort of whim and of your own accord before somebody comes along and tries to pressure you into it. Because I felt like I had that level of pliability, I suppose. I probably was very romantic and idealistic, and I wanted to get married, and that was my whole goal, to be honest. I was studying law, but I was like, I'm going to get married and have kids. And it's so funny how differently my life has turned out. So it was very much a push to belong. I think it was a sense of like I wanted to stand in that power of it, and it was a very, very powerful affirmative moment for me to wear it, because it was my choice, and I wore it for nearly 10 years. It wasn't a whim. I shouldn't say that, actually. It was, but it felt a bit like a whim sometimes, like very quickly putting it on. And my mother just cautioned me against going overboard. So my mum wears a version of a scarf, but it's not the full hijab. And she just said, still dress like a young person, you be modest, all of that. But I think I kind of took it to a different extreme where I really did. I hid inside this scarf. That's how I look at it. I see someone who was terrified of probably like the things I really wanted to do with my life and feeling like those things were beyond my reach. And so I put this headscarf on, and it made it okay straight away, because it was like, well, you've just put this thing in place that's going to stop you from being able to do certain things anyway. And it's that complex, actually, but you don't know that at the time. It's only in hindsight that you can look back and you can see that actually I was probably, and I can't, this is my personal experience. I definitely don't pretend to speak for other people, but there is so much safety in like, I will use the word here, fear, because, whether we like it or not, women are conditioned in religion, especially, to be modest, to set the standard for everybody in terms of behavior. We get punished more than men if they act up, so it's our fault if a man is tempted by us. And so I think that a lot of that stuff, it's heavy, it's really not as simple as like, really what the headscarf is about is allegiance to God, and yet for some reason it still seems to be about how men feel about it. And I'll never forget one day when I was in my early uni days and I hadn't put it on yet. And I was walking with a couple of other Arab Muslim women, and they weren't wearing the headscarf, but we were with some guys who, like, we were all going to like a talk or something. So it was actually very legit. But a man who was very fully bearded and religious approached us, and he started lecturing us. He said, sisters, it doesn't cost much to go get a headscarf and put it on your head, as though the money was the issue. And I just thought it's really strange to me how easily men feel they can tell us to put something on. And like, when I wrote about taking it off, it was a lot of men attacking me and women. It wasn't just women. And it's just, I just don't ever pretend to know what it's like to be another person if I haven't experienced what they've been going through in their lives. And so I think it's really, I find it astounding how much we are policed as women, how much we're made to feel guilty if we don't set the standard that is considered pious and good and all of these things, as though a headscarf makes you a better Muslim or a better person, and it just doesn't. I mean, it's clothing, it's something. It can absolutely mean a lot to you as a person, but it doesn't make you a better person, if that makes sense. So totally I don't. Makes sense. Yeah, it's just I wish there were more nuanced conversations around that for women, actually. I don't really care what men think. I care what women think, and I care that women are pressured, and that we actually take it on in a way where we convince ourselves that it was our idea. I don't know why women have to be the bearers of the modesty, pressure. Like, I don't understand why we're brought up to feel so much of a heaviness when it comes to how we dress and how we behave. And I feel like men don't get the same sort of pressure, or there's no microscope on them in the same way. And it's problematic.
Yeah, I mean, that plays across cultures.
100%. I mean, I see it all the time, and I see it in, I mean, I'm in my 40s now, and I look at things like Instagram, and I see the pressure on women to look a certain way and to behave a certain way and to dumb themselves down. Like, there's so much content where, I don't know if you watch, like, sometimes you'll watch a video. I mean, I don't really do TikTok. I'm not a fan of it, but Instagram, for example, just the shorts, the way people are actually even talking now, they're up talking and then they don't finish the sentence. They're just cutting off. The editing is so crisp because they have to fit all this stuff into like 60 seconds.
Right.
And I just think that something's happening where we're not going deep anymore. We're really like, this isn't me judging. I see myself doing it all the time. Like, I just need a quick break from reality. So I think I'll watch this 60-second food influencer video, and it's just nonsense. It's not deep at all. So there's so much chaos in this world. There's so much going on, and we can honestly just waste so much time focusing on these things that don't actually, like, people are losing their lives now. This is what matters. Like, it doesn't get worse than that, right? The worst thing you can do to someone is to take their life. And it just saddens me to see people still focus on things that actually, they're not going to be the things that make or break our lives. Like, they are, we've got to focus on how can we create harmony within ourselves so that we're comfortable deciding for ourselves what is right. And I think that it starts with women, especially because we are mothers. I mean, I'm not a mother, but I know that there is that pressure of motherhood, of being a good daughter, of being a good wife, of being a good, how do we look, I saw Meryl Streep talking about women in Afghanistan, and it's like, well, there are women being absolutely annihilated in Gaza right now. Like, this is insane to me. What are you even talking about?
Yeah, or pick a number of countries.
It's this thing that they can use. Like, I'm gonna scare you. And I mean, The Handmaid's Tale did a great job of, like, pick and mixing from all these things that have happened to women throughout history, and saying, well, what if it happened to women in America? Then we've got a problem. And these are the things that are happening, and people aren't thinking about it. They just fixated on the easy. Let's just make it an easy target. Like, women in Afghanistan have less rights than a squirrel. But what about the women in Gaza who don't have anything right now? Whose lives are under constant threat. This is just, we're all out of whack. We're all out of whack.
We are. And symbolism changes, right? I mean, at the moment, the veil in its various forms and its most extreme forms has come to mean the oppression of women for a lot of people in a world that keeps serving that up as the example of what's going on, the front page.
What's more oppressive, being bombed or a woman covering her hair? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, well,
like, yes. I don't understand, it's like, is it easier to bomb them because they wear the headscarf? I don't know. Has that made it easier for people to, is it, I don't want to, like, derail the conversation, but there's something in this. It's scary to me that women who look a certain way can be frightening enough to people that they will accept, punishment of them. Because one of the things I saw a lot of when the whole thing started happening in Gaza a year ago was an appeal to sort of the LGBTQI community, saying you wouldn't be welcome in Gaza. You would be thrown off a cliff or something like that. And I just thought, what on earth are you talking about? What is this nonsense? And thankfully there were a lot of people who identify within those communities who said, I don't care. You can't kill people just because, it's... But do you see how it's all like, it's not separate. Like, these things, these images of Muslim women especially have been used historically to allow punishment of those societies. Afghanistan's a great example of that. With the Taliban, suddenly America was very heightened and aware of the oppression of women in Afghanistan after 9/11, and then they went in and attacked this country that didn't even do it. Like, it was just...
Yeah.
There's no separation, is what I'm saying. And so it's really hard as well to then critique the headscarf, because it makes it sound like you're punching down on your own community or something, which is not the case. Like, you can't separate all these things. Like, you have to, like, understand that everything is tied in, but you can actually identify that element as an Arab woman. I'm allowed to do that because it affects me directly.
Well, I think in the video, the most important thing you said, and I'm not sure if it gets said enough, it's ultimately about choice.
It is, and I unfortunately I've had a lot of Muslim women say to me, "Well, it's not really what we mean by choice," And I said, I think it is because belief, right, is a choice.
Yeah.
ultimately, and I really want to emphasize that there is a difference between belief and faith. I don't think they're the same thing. So I think a lot of people can have faith and they don't really believe anything. They just have faith that there is something, and they don't have a true grip on what it is, but they know that there is something and they have faith in that. And then there are people who have beliefs, but they kind of lack faith because they go through the motions, really. And I think it's just really important to have that differentiation, because to me, of course, how you practice is a choice, because otherwise Islam especially talks about being tested. So it's not a test if you just, if it's an obligation, if that makes sense. It's got to be something where you have chosen this, path, you've chosen to believe. And because we're all actually, most of us are born into a religion, it still becomes a choice, because as you start to get older, your faculties and all that improve and your intellect rises and all these things start to happen, you start to ask questions and you start to decide for yourself that this is what you believe, and that's still a choice. And so it's really not, and I've had people say, I had one guy just email me trying to accuse me of leaving the religion because I took off the headscarf, and it was like, you would have no idea what my faith looks like. But he had decided that because I had taken off the headscarf, I had somehow decided that I was rejecting everything. And yet my beliefs about religion and spirituality are so complex and so lived, you know what I mean? I don't come to anything lightly. Even taking off the headscarf took me 2 years. It wasn't something I did overnight. I put it on quicker than I took it off. So I think it's really interesting to me that people don't understand that most women, if they've chosen to put it on, they have chosen to put it on. It is genuinely their choice. But I definitely know that there are women out there who did not choose it, that they have been pressured into it. I know, and I've done school talks, and I've had girls who are, in their teens come up to me after and say, I don't want to wear this. I don't know how to do this because my family wants me to wear it, and they're not in trouble. It's not like the family's bad, but the family wants to protect the daughter, so they have her wearing the headscarf because she's reached puberty, and it's really hard because I want to say I understand, and I just tell them to keep grow as a person, to find out who you are, and then see where that leads you. Because I know that if I was going to leave it to people to tell me it's okay to take it off, that wasn't going to happen. It had to come from me. So I feel like these are the things that people, by far the thing that people have written to me the most about is the headscarf. Women have written to me and said, adult women, I've read your book, or I've read an article that you wrote, and I'm really conflicted because I love my family, but I don't want to wear this anymore. And I'm afraid that if I take it off, I'm going to lose them. This is how serious it is. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Yeah, it's really, really hard.
You interviewed 60 women for the book.
I think it was about 80, actually.
Was it? It's, the blurb gave me 60, but interviewing even 60 women is a massive undertaking. It's huge.
Was,
As a researcher, I know how that is. And so as a book, it's obviously covering a fascinating breadth. What do you feel when it came to this subject of choice and faith and how people engage with that? What was your take on that?
What was really interesting to me was that the women in the Arab world were less conflicted. It was actually a very Western agony, I would say, that women were really sort of it was a little bit overwrought sometimes, this defense of it or this need to explain it and all that sort of thing. Whereas in the Arab world, a lot of women just don't wear it, and they kind of are surprised when they meet a Western Arab Muslim woman wearing it. And I want to be clear, Beyond Veiled Clichés was very heavily focused on Arab women, so it wasn't just Muslim women, it was actually Arab women across different religions, beliefs, all of that. But it wasn't a book about Muslim women as such, but I couldn't write a whole book about Arab women and not include a focus, and there was a whole chapter on the veil for this reason. And I remember being, it was just very funny how amused almost some of these women were by why is it such a, like, you guys are in the West, like, why is this such a big deal? Because if anything, there's more judgment against women sometimes in the Arab world. Like, they feel like it's, there's definitely like the same, that some things mirror. Like in the Middle East, you still had the women who were very religious, who, feel like it's their place to lecture other women on whether or not they should wear it. But I feel like they're more protected from that based on sort of who they associate with, where they live. And it's the same thing you see in like Sydney, and I'm sure Melbourne and other countries, like other places in Australia, is that when you are part of a particular minority, you tend to form a community in that sort of, it's very tight, and everything makes sense in that community. And it's only when you step outside of that community that there is judgment, or there is a need to defend yourself and all of that. And so it can create this very strange thing where in the Arab world, I think it's just understood. Some people wear it and some people don't. Whereas in the Western world, it is absolutely like you wear a headscarf, and it's like you are a minority within a minority. And so now you're starting to see more women like in ads for like banks and things like that. And when I first started in retail when I was younger, I was wearing a headscarf, and like that was almost unheard of. Like nobody was wearing it. Like I don't think people understand really what it was like for my generation to be wearing a headscarf, because we were really outliers. Like it was an unusual image. Whereas nowadays, I think it's much more accepted. It doesn't mean everybody likes it, but it's not unusual. We're more accustomed to seeing it. It doesn't sort of trigger people in the same way.
So in every culture, it feels like, although there are a couple that kind of get showcased to say it's different there, there is a containment of female sexuality and a policing of how we are. You talked about it before. We carry the burden of modesty and communities kind of managing of behaviours. How, in the women that you spoke with, how were they navigating their sexuality in an environment where it, like any other, is being managed?
Well, one of the things that should be noted is that Islam is one of those religions where it's made very clear again and again that everything is fine as long as you're married. So there was no sort of sense that women weren't allowed to look forward to sex or enjoy sex. It was that it had to be within the confines of marriage. You could only be with your husband. So there was that pressure on women. And then there's also the cultural pressure of like a woman needing to bleed on her wedding night and things like that. That's all. There's a bit of a... if you're going to put a Venn diagram of like religion, culture, and then they intersect there, like there's this sort of sense that there's a bit of a grey area you don't really know. I don't think that anyone I think if anything, women just kind of, there was this, the biggest thing I noticed was like once a woman was married, it was almost like she was a woman, that's it. And I feel like it's really interesting to me that sexual experience was what made a person a grown-up versus actual life experience or age. So that was probably one of the things that I grew up probably being a bit afraid of. Like, oh my God, if I don't get married, am I just going to be this like Jane Austen spinster and everyone's going to feel sorry for me and all these sorts of things. And then you start to realize that life is just not that simple. Like, you will start to interact in different ways when you're in the workplace and get to know people. And, regardless of like virginity, I mean, I don't think sex really begins there. I think that sexual attraction is a very, very strong thing that most people go through. And so they have to figure out how to work around that, when they know that they have these restrictions. Like and for a lot of people, it's a restriction they don't have a problem with. Like they are very happy to be religious and it's fine. Some people, not so much. Like it really, I can't speak for everyone. I remember there was one person I interviewed who was really like, she just said, I'm frustrated as a single woman in my 30s that like I'm supposed to, basically sacrifice that part of me if I don't find the right guy. And it was a real dilemma for me because I thought it's not like alcohol where kind of like you don't crave it. Like it's something you either drink or you don't drink, but it's not like everybody has this inherent need for alcohol. Whereas I think most people have an inherent need for touch or connection or they will absolutely naturally feel attracted to people. And so I think that's a really tricky area, because what do you tell somebody? Like, and I married late. It was very, very difficult. Like, knowing in my 20s that this part of my life was just going. And I think for me, I really wanted to be honest about that. Like, it's not just because I'm doing something that's right doesn't mean it feels good. It felt really hard to do that. I think a lot of people come to that term, like that realization later. They realize that it doesn't always have to be that extreme. Like, you can still figure things out. But I mean, I'm a big believer that, like, if something is considered sinful, it's still between you and God. It's not between you and the community. It's not the community's job to decide who you are based on an action. If you are really God-fearing, then why would you try to take that role? Like, it's not your job. It's God's job. And so I feel like there's that complexity that is not really understood, that women, and I don't think there's any kind of, there's no negative relationship to sex in the sense of, like, we're not allowed to enjoy it or anything like that. And on the most extreme, I have encountered Muslims who are like, you shouldn't be fully naked when you're having sex. And like, there should still be an element of modesty, which I don't understand. But I guess, back in the day, didn't women wear those sheets with the hole cut out? So, I mean, I don't know, like, I can't speak for everyone. And then the other thing is, there is a whole chapter on queer life, like, queer people spoke to me who, they are, some of them very devout Muslims, but they feel the way they feel. And it was really interesting, because I was like, do you feel let down that the religion considers what you feel sinful? And it was a complicated thing, because I don't think that they had a straight answer for it. So, it's a tough one. But, and then the main thing I think is that sexual experience somehow seemed to equal adulthood suddenly, and womanhood. And I think that that's really underrating what life does for us as people, as women. There's so much that grows, like, so much grows you, like, so much challenges you, so much in life will make you the person you are. And let's not underestimate the power of attraction. Like, I think that sometimes feeling is so much more important than physical touch. Like, there's so many things that are going to create the person you are. And this idea that sex is suddenly the only thing that can matter and make you feel like you've reached this important checkpoint in life, I think is quite funny. And, the other thing is as well that, nobody really talks to you about how hard it's going to be as a woman to have sex. For a lot of women, it's extremely painful. It's extremely difficult to get used to that when you've spent your whole life thinking that this is not allowed unless you're with someone you're married to. How do you prepare for that? And as a result, a lot of women did talk about how it took them months, if not longer, to become, like, comfortable. And we know that this is not an Arab phenomenon. It's not a Muslim phenomenon. This is a women's phenomenon that, is it vaginismus or something like that? It's called, where women are very uncomfortable when they have sex, and so their muscles are tight and all this sort of stuff. And there's so many things that we're not educated on, because it's just like, when you get married, that's when it's going to matter. But it's like, it's just not that simple. Like, we have to get to know our bodies in a lot of ways, in terms of, like, what we're capable of as people as well. And, my hope for every woman or man or whoever, is that when they're with someone, that it's someone they're so comfortable with that, these things are a non-issue in that sense. But that's not the reality.
No, but as you say, we're not taught about our own bodies or pleasure.
No, we're not. I mean, I think, holding up a banana in PE with a condom on it is not really educational for women, because not every woman wants that anyway. So it's just this weird thing where, like, I think it's like, I just feel like we are in a society of extremes. It's like, either there is so much shock value and let's show you how far we can take sexual aspects of our lives in film and TV and all these things, versus the more subtle sort of, this is something, but it's not everything. It's a strange thing,
Sex couple of people I've spoken with over the years with this, sex has become understood to mean penetration so strongly that, ill-educated as we are, often, even if we do wait till we're married and we're with a loving partner, nobody's actually clear about how this works beyond penetration and pleasure, and how a woman's body works, and what the clitoris is and how it works, and, you know, all these things that are mysteries. And so it feels like that opening up of space for conversation anywhere in any culture is critical.
And I just remembered what I was going to tell you, actually. There was a book written many years ago, and I didn't love it for a lot of reasons, because predominantly, and you know, I don't really love that books written by Anglo women in the desert. Like, it's a whole thing, and it's kind of what prompted me to write Beyond Veiled Clichés. But this particular book was called Muhajir Babes. So when you wear a hijab, you're muhajjab, like, you know, you wear a headscarf. And so her book was called Muhajir Babes, which was a really good name, actually. I think her name was Allegra Stratton or something. Anyway, she went to the Arab world, of course, to explore and make sense of it, blah, blah, all that after 9/11. And what was really interesting was she was describing these women who wore the headscarf, but they were really trendy and cool. They were Muhajir Babes. They weren't Muhajjabin, they were Muhajir Babes. And so, you know, what it was, you know, the barely there headscarf, the little tiny handbag, you know, their body clearly on display, not necessarily skin wise, but like you could see their shape, and they were wearing tight jeans and all that sort of stuff. And it was really fascinating because it absolutely defeats the purpose of the traditional meaning of the headscarf. Like, the headscarf is entirely, like, you know, it's a modesty garment. It is absolutely a behavioral garment as well. Like, if you're wearing a headscarf, you know, you actually are probably more hyper aware of your behavior and things like that. And so when I see that, I actually do find it quite funny, because it's like possible that they want to, there are different possibilities here, and one of them is that they were forced to wear it, and so they're like, well, if I'm going to wear it, I'm going to still be fashionable. And then there's the other version where they actually want to wear it, but they just don't want to look like, you know, dumpy and all this sort of stuff or whatever in a big dress. And so I think that was really interesting. And I wrote about taking off the headscarf in Australia for what we had. It was called Daily Life, and it was on the Sydney Morning Herald website, and it just went off for, like, I think it was a couple of years. It was a really popular daily website, and women, especially women, wrote articles every day about, you know, daily life. And I wrote about taking off the headscarf, and I mean, I absolutely got attacked so badly for that, even though it was very thoughtful and not at all me trying to say you shouldn't wear it. But what had prompted it, like the reason why I wrote it when I did, was there was an exhibition at the Powerhouse Museum called Faith Fashion Fusion. And so you had these beautiful Muslim women wearing all these different kinds of garments, expressing their fashion sense, you know, expressing themselves through fashion, rather. And some of them wore like head coverings and some didn't. And they got annihilated by people, because there was this beautiful image of them against a wall, all like what I loved about it was like, here's the different shapes and sizes of modesty, here's the different faces of modern Muslim Australia, and yet all people wanted to do was say, oh, God forgive these women for like trying to make it trendy and trying to look good, and sort of, it's like, well, if we're going to argue that, you know, inherently we're sexual beings, inherently we also want to express ourselves, we're creative beings. And so I think that fashion is a creative outlet. I don't think that these women were being sinful, but, you know, I'm not like, it's not really my job to judge them, but it was just really sad to me to see that nobody thought, for example, well, at least they're trying. Like, it's not easy to wear a headscarf. Like, I don't care what anybody says. There are days where you don't want to. Like, there are days where, you know, you just wish you could blend in. And that's essentially like a huge factor for me of why I took it off, was I wanted to be anonymous. I did not want to stand out every time I walked down the street. I didn't want that kind of abuse. I didn't want that kind of a stare. Like, I just wanted to be me. And it was like I had sort of almost been in battle with that version of myself. I didn't know who I was. And it was like I became a version of myself in the headscarf. And I just don't think people really understand the sacrifice that it is. And I wish that there had been a bit more of a nuanced discussion about it. So when I tried to introduce that, I just got absolutely attacked as well. I think I got kicked out. You know what I mean? Like, and people were saying things like, you know, she should have brought it up with the community. It's like, where? At what? The town hall meeting? I don't need your permission to feel what I feel, you know? And I felt like it was a really sad thing because I had people who I considered friends trying to get me in it, you know, trying to like pull me into it and like, you know, the court of public opinion and not defending me. And I thought that was really, it showed a lack of sophistication in terms of thinking, you know, because like you need to grow up. You need to understand that this is a layered experience. It's not as simple as like, well, you know, you don't believe in God enough if you don't wear it. It's like, well, please tell me how pious you are if you're a man and you can hide behind what, you know. I know men who have a beard who don't want one, but they feel this pressure of like, one guy said to me, he said to me, I feel that way about my beard. I wish I could shave it off. But the amount of judgment I would get is so strong. And I thought that was so illuminating. I had no idea. And then I realized this is if just sorry, humor me for a second. I realized talking about one of my books at a festival a couple of years ago, The Things We See in the Light, in this book, she takes off the headscarf. But I don't overdo it. The book isn't about her taking the headscarf off. It's just a moment in the book. And what was interesting to me was I said, everybody's had that moment in their lives. It's just, it might not be a headscarf. It's the moment where the mask falls away. And that's essentially what I feel like, that we will layer ourselves with all these things that make us feel like this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and I want everybody to know it. And then one day that stuff doesn't hold you up anymore, and you need to start looking at who you truly are inside. And I would say that who you are as a person, how you behave in the world, how you interact, the effect you have on people is 10 times more important, 100 times more important than how you look. So I don't know. I know my views don't necessarily make me popular, but I will never attack a woman for wearing it. That was never my intention. It's never been my intention. And I think that people know that. There are women who take off their headscarf and it becomes their mission to get everybody on side. I didn't do that. I took it off and I took it off. That's all I did. So when I talked about it, I didn't talk about it in a way to convince people. I said, I want you to understand that there's more to this story than you think. And I had people coming into my inbox. They didn't feel comfortable saying it publicly. One guy, never forget it, he said to me, my sister took it off and I didn't understand until I read your article. Oh. So it's our job to like show up authentically in life. And I think that that's the greatest lesson we can take from things like this, that, you know, it doesn't mean anything. You can wear a headscarf or not wear a headscarf. You don't know what's going on inside that person.
I think it's what you've given here is a beautifully nuanced and layered account of the headscarf from your perspective, and that's what matters, right? It's opening space to humanize and understand that there's way more to this than you see in that media image that you get.
Yeah, and it's not a reason to judge people. It's not a reason to see them as a lesser form of human. They're not. It's actually, in many ways, a very high expression of love, you know, for some people. And so, you know, maybe they're in a much better mental space than you if they're wearing it. I don't know. Like, I can't comment for everybody, but to have faith when you know that your life is in peril, to me, is a really mighty thing, you know, and it's enviable. You know, it's a really special thing.
Now, before we go, one thing I did want to talk about, because you have also produced fictional work, and you've had some significant success with your latest book. And as I said, it's approaching seasonal gift giving, and I'm a perennial buyer of books for people because why not? Talk us through Bitter and Sweet, and who you think might be appropriate if somebody out there's thinking, oh, that sounds like an interesting thing. Who should I buy that for?
So Bitter and Sweet ticks a lot of boxes. It's I mean, in a way, you could actually argue that primarily it's food fiction, because a lot of reviews talk about the food aspect of it. You know, the central character, Zena, is a chef. And so there is a lot of Arabic food in there. It's also a book about sort of belonging and identity. Without hitting you on the head with it, it's really about someone who knows that she is the daughter of Palestinians, and that her way of connecting to that heritage is through food. You know, she understands that culture is not a place. You know, it sort of inherently understands this, but is trying to make sense of it. And she's looked for it in the people, in her husband, who, you know, is now estranged from her. She's looked for herself in other people and other things to make sense of this disconnect. Being, you know, a migrant child in the West, you know, you're a third, what you're called a third culture child. A third culture kid. That's what they call it. And you know, being a chef who can make really good Arabic food makes her less of that in her mind. And there's a whole lot going on there. But if you like books about friendship, food, sort of, I guess, finding the courage to be yourself even when you're a bit older. So like my last two books, the characters are, like, either have been 40 or above. Because I am in my 40s, I don't really feel like I need to write a book about a 30-year-old finding herself. I've written two books that are very much, like, I would say in some ways coming of age later in life. And I think we never really cease coming of age. Like we are constantly like so spiraling up. We're constantly like revisiting who we are and who we can be. And this book is about that discovery of self, really, in a really beautiful way, because it's realizing that not everything matters, but that a lot of things do, and that it's your job in life to find that truth, to find that place where your life isn't necessarily easy, but it's yours. It belongs to you, and you know who you are. And I think that that's a gift. Like I think so many people don't know who they are or who they want to be, and that's because they're taking notes. They're taking notes from the collective, you know, on who they should be. And I think we're all guilty of that. And it's not just, you know, especially one thing I love about Zena is this is not a book about someone who's at all grappling with religion. She's not a religious person. I gave myself permission to write a book where that was not the issue. So the previous three books all had elements of that in it, because they are all centered in the same world. So quoting Samira, this is how you get better, and the things we see in the light are three characters who each book belongs to one character. And they change in tone as well. So quoting Samira is chick lit, unapologetic chick lit romance. You know, this is how you get better is a bit more of an acerbic sort of Nick Hornby type of writing. And then the third one, the things we see in the light, is just much more serious and dramatic. And that she was the most religious character. So Sahar she was the one who had the most to lose because she was the most devout. So I asked myself, what happens when you take religion away from her? And it was a really interesting journey into her psyche and her challenges, because she didn't want to lose everything in that journey, but also she knew she couldn't be the same person she was before. And so with Bitter and Sweet, I didn't do any of that. It was like, that's not an issue at all. And it was very funny when one particular publication put an excerpt of the book up and they put a picture of a woman in a headscarf. I thought, it's not even a character in the book who wears one. And I had to ask them to change it because it was completely deceptive. It had nothing to do with the story at all. So I think that's the thing. If you want to read a book where Arab people just happen to be Arab, and yeah, it is an element, like in terms of their identity is something up sort of for discussion, but it's not the point of the book. It's really her human identity. You know, her humanity is what's being tested, not her Arabness, but she thinks that it's that. She thinks that her Arab identity is the sort of the make or break until she starts to discover the layers of existence. It's much deeper than that. And really, I think we hide behind our relationships. We hide behind so many things. And the beauty of being a fiction writer is that you get to explore all of this and hide yourself within it, you know. And I don't think that she's me. And I really emphasize this, like that would not be fiction. You know, but no. I think that you get to be a different version of you when you're writing fiction, because I can't answer Zena's questions as me. I have to answer them as her. So I think Bitter and Sweet it's a very sort of, I mean, if you're not sure, read the reviews. A lot of people sort of have written really lovely reviews about the book and can see the layers of it. Like deceptively, it seems like, hey, this is going to be a book about, like, you know, finding yourself, and it's just food fiction. But then you read it and you realize that there's a lot more going on.
Well, I think that it sounds perfect to me. So put it on the Christmas list, everybody, and, and explore. If you haven't found Amal's writing before, then explore it through this for sure.
Thank you so much.
Amal, thank you so much for joining us today. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
an important conversation.
We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Before we sign off, we wanted to ask you for your help. Because we talk about sex, we keep getting shadow banned across a whole bunch of social media platforms. And that not only makes it hard for people to find us, but it sends a message that sex isn't okay to talk about. Not only is sex okay to talk about, it's totally essential, because more knowledge equals better outcomes for all of us across a whole bunch of different measures. You can make a difference, and what we need from you is your active support. So please follow the podcast and consider checking out our social channels too, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, whatever takes your fancy. You can find us at sexandspace.com and click on our social links from there. Help us make sex an okay space. Thank you for taking the Sex and Space trip with us, and until next time, safe travels, and we'll see you on the next intergalactic episode.